So and so we grew from a dozen and a half, mostly Americans, to some 300 members in 28 countries. It was obviously an idea whose time had come in the World Aikido community. And then we began to think of, well, why don't we start using this in the world community to address pressing problems. And the initial one, which came to my mind during a visit to Israel in 2003, I believe, was to use Aikido as a bridge between Palestinian Arabs and Israeli Jews. So I began to cultivate connections there, and I spoke with Jamie Zimran, who had been in Israel and knew Arabs and Jews, Hebrew and Arabic also, and she suggested the phrase salam shalom, and that hit me right away. So we started to put together the idea of a seminar outside of Israel for Palestinians and Israeli Jews, and we were going to do one in Istanbul, and had gotten pretty far along when the Palestinians got afraid and didn't come, and our funding source, we had a small grant, then actually withdrew the grant they had given us. So then I talked with Richard Strozzi Heckler, and I said, I don't think this is going to go anywhere. And he said, well, why not try it on a bigger scale and do it in Cyprus? And the minute he said that, I thought, okay, that's it. You know, just as Jamie saying salam shalom, it doesn't take much to get me up and running. And so the result of that was this historic seminar with 100 people from a dozen countries, Greeks and Turks, North and South Cypriot, it's Bosnians and Serbs, as well as Jews from Israel and America and England and Scotland and Arabs from Palestine, Jordan, and Iraq. And it was an extraordinary experience. I think you know the DVD that, thanks to Philip Eminger, was produced on that event. And that got us really up and running. And then we began to experiment elsewhere. We had started the project for helping children who lived in the favelas of Sao Paulo, Brazil. This is the mug that the founder there, Jose Bueno, put together along with many wonderful artistic touches. And then we started the Awasa Peace Dojo in the capital of the southern region of Ethiopia. And the key figure there, Tesfaye Tekelu, I discovered during a visit to a children's center for AIDS orphans in Awasa, and he seemed very talented, and so I invited him to the Cyprus seminar. I had met him and given him maybe half a dozen hours at most of training when he served as a guide for my wife and me during a tour in southern Ethiopia in August 2004. So took a chance and invited him to Cyprus, and in 3 days he picked up enough Aikido to do a perfectly fine 6Q demonstration with Richard Heckler, Jamie Zimran, and myself as examiners, and Mark Walsh as his uke. I had asked Mark to room with him to kind of be a senpai, and Mark was so taken by him that then later, when Tesfaye returned And we established the Iwasa Peace Dojo early in 2006 during my visit there for other reasons. Subsequently, Mark went down for 3 months as an Aiki Corps volunteer, and other members, including David Weinstock of near Seattle, Washington, went with his family and friends for 6 weeks. And so we had a number of visitors going to help Tesfaye train. Another participant in Cyprus, Kurt Bartlett Sensei of Zurich, has a continuation of training across borders, which was the name of the Cyprus seminar in Zurich, and Tesfaye went for 2 summers to that training experience. And he is so talented that he picked up enough to take first the second Q test and then the first Q test at those camps in Switzerland. And so then he came with 2 colleagues from the Iwasa Youth Campus to this country at the beginning of October 2008 to raise funds and get public awareness of the Iwasa Youth Campus, and decided to stay on, and we arranged training experiences for him in Chicago and at the Aikido of Berkeley, and then finally the 6 weeks at Two Rock Dojo, and the rest is recent history. He gave a wonderful, wonderful Shodan demonstration, and it was just a very thrilling moment. It's not just about Tesfaye, of course. It's about introducing Aikido into Ethiopia. It had never been practiced there, and into this country with a long history of aggressive warriorhood, and slowly reorienting the culture toward a nonviolent warriorhood ethic. Tesfaye is deeply committed to that. He's also deeply committed to using Aikido as a resource for helping young people grow in a hopeful and positive way. Previously, he had worked with a group of gymnasts in Iwasa, and that later then became enfolded into the what's called the One Love Theater, that does AIDS education performances all over Ethiopia. And when he was in Cyprus and he was being interviewed for the film there, the producer, Heath Kurtz, asked him, this was an interview in Amharic, which I was translating for, what attracts you about Amharic? And to my very pleasant surprise, he said, it's a way of expressing love for these young people, orphans and others. He says it's much better for that purpose than gymnastics. And that's how he manifests Aikido, and he uses it now just not only to help the young people there, but to reduce gang violence. There were some very active violent gangs there were lots of killings associated with their fighting, and he has succeeded in bringing leaders of those gangs into his dojo to train together in Aikido. And he has also succeeded with David Weinstock in going to officials in Addis Ababa and getting them to approve the idea of incorporating Aikido training as a requirement for all high school seniors in the capital city of Ethiopia and indeed of all Africa. And so this is quite a a story of excitement, of devotion, and of hope in a part of the world that at the moment is one of the most vulnerable and usually associated with despair and warfare and the rest of human afflictions. It's an alternative way, and we're very, very thankful to have had IKEA Extensions play a part in that development.
Great. Can you tell me something about how Aikido can be, the thrust of this documentary when I first started out was an idea of what it would be like if governments practiced their relationships
Yeah.
in accordance with the principles of Aikido.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I have spoken with the Prime Minister of Ethiopia one-on-one for 6 hours when I was there in 2006, because there had been an election in May 2005, and this was their first multi-party, genuinely open election ever. And the opposition was pulling out a lot of hate stops. Not all of them, not all the leaders, but there was a lot of anti-ethnic rhetoric and a lot of vilification, along with some very serious proposals for helping Ethiopia move forward. And there was evidence that the government, which had been open for months, then began to clamp down as it became clear that the levels of opposition to them were higher than anticipated. So there was some documented activity in some of the locales that affected the accurate and honest reporting of votes, and this became parlayed into that the government stole the election by the opposition. They held a huge demonstration a few weeks after the election. The government moved in with tanks and guns, and there were a total in their reactions close to 200 killings. So the country became intensely polarized, and so I went in January 2006 to try to mediate between the opposition leaders, who at that point were in prison and remained there for 1.5 years, and the independent journalists on the one hand and the government on the other. So that was the reason I was having these one-on-one conversations with the Prime Minister, and I told him about Aikido and about the idea of a new martial art, kind of martial art. And I have published a number of things in that appeared in newspapers in Addis Ababa, as well as on blogs and websites and so forth. And I've been hammering this thing, and I gave it, became a major part of what I've been saying to Ethiopians since then, that they have to do, if they're going to have peace, what the Japanese warriors did, a transformation that was reported and analyzed in a wonderful book by a Japanese-American sociologist at Harvard called The Domestication of the Samurai. And the domestication of the Ethiopian warrior needs to, and the warrior idea, needs to take place before there will be any peace in that country. and then with their neighbors. Someone recently said to me that a Kenyan told him Ethiopians just love to fight wars. Well, they do. This is a tradition. It's gone on for, thousands of years, and they have to reorient their ideals from fighting to kill to fighting to protect human life, as Aikido represents. And so I'm hopeful that with this development of this Awasa Youth Center, and with a coming visit with Richard Strozzi Heckler and myself there, and talking with more and more people, getting the Aiki spirit more promulgated in the country. Thanks to Tesfaye and his One Love Theater group, they have made 2 10-city tours all around the country, showing their One Love performances in the service of AIDS education and the gymnastics, and everywhere they go they do an Aikido demonstration. So that within a period of 1 or 2 years, Aikido has gone from being totally unknown to being known all over the country. He's been on national television, and so we have this incredible opportunity, a lot of momentum to inject it into the political culture, and we'll see what happens.
So, what are the principles of Aikido that could be applied by governments in interaction with other governments? How would that play out on a global scale, internationally?
Well, we could have seen it happen in the wake of the 9/11 attacks. At that time, we had a network of communication in Aiki extensions about what would be an Aiki response to the 9/11 attacks. And we had some very good responses. And one thing you do is get centered. You don't quickly rush in and attack. Another thing you do is take stock of your resources, okay? Line up your allies. Don't make enemies, make friends. And then don't undertake counterattacks in ways that will fuel an escalation. All governments, could heed those principles and learn to negotiate rather than react defensively. I think that's pretty good policy.
Just as a matter of speculation, how could Aikido principles have prevented the events of 9/11?
Well, as a matter of speculation, awareness. Okay, there were so many indications that that something like 9/11 was brewing, and they were not taken into account. They were not responded to promptly or adequately. Also, we could have been more sensitive about planting American bases in Saudi Arabia, which was, the original inspiration, if you will, or the stimulus for Osama bin Laden's, commitment to do what he could to savage the United States. So there are lots of possibilities. Being centered, being aware, not reacting, having an open extension of key at all times. And then the concrete steps follow from that.
I think they're telling us time is up.
Okay?
Thank you. There's so much more when I